You suspend those beliefs so anything can happen. We have a very similar concept in games. My name is Dennis Morgan. I am the president and founder of Harlem CoLab, and I'm also a game designer. We're in a world now that is fully digital. We all engage with our phones, we're all at ATMs, we're all driving our cars, and the jobs of the future are in that space. I have found that the under-resourced areas within our city and within our community, there is a gap in their understanding about the digital tools that they have in front of them. I've been in New York now for 23 years. I've always lived in Harlem. It's my community. And I believe that the Harlem Renaissance can happen again, and I think this time it happens in digital. My work has been about what sort of programs can we put in place that allows you to partner with larger corporations and these technology centers that then brings the type of curriculum that you're looking for. I started that work at my children's school. We didn't have a strong focus on technology and STEM careers. And a lot of this could be due to the fact that we're not exposing our children at a young age to the possibilities, making them wonder and think. It started with a simple STEM fair. One of the things that I realized is I could make a connection with a company to bring robots into the school and have somebody demo those robots. Watching kids as they explore those spaces, I think of myself. I think about how I didn't necessarily have access to that as a young child, and just thinking to myself how much fun I would have had if I had that opportunity. A lot of what I want to do is make games, and I want to make these games and these ideas and these concepts more accessible for everyone. It's the gateway game. This is the first one that I ever really played. I have many, many hours against that one. I got an opportunity to start taking classes through the Scholars Program. The only place I found games was in Teachers College, and they were focused on games and education. And I took 2 classes, both of them the design courses, and I was like, this is it. You don't have to pause it, it's okay. I got a call in December, and they said, what are you doing this spring? Love it if you want to teach. And I was like, that's a no-brainer. Everyone has played this game. Have you ever described to someone how to play the game? I'm trying to be smart about the games I bring into class. What's really nice about board games is you can expand the UI, you expose the rules, so you can move and touch things. You can see really well why some things are happening and why they're not happening.
You want to be a detective? Okay, great.
As a bundles community scholar, I'm getting access to things I hadn't thought about. And now I'm using those to help propel my business or propel my thoughts on game design. It's been absolutely life-changing, and I just want to keep it going and trying to bring as many people along with me as I can. I do want to thank all of the other candidates and all of the past, present, and future bundle scholars. It's on your shoulders that I stand on, and I really want to thank you guys for this opportunity. So thank you. So let's take an even further step back than just a few years ago. Let's go all the way back to the 80s. I'm a child of the 80s. I grew up with video games, and one of the things that I heard oh so often was how much of a waste of time playing games was. And I can imagine this, I'm hearing this voice. This is the voice of my mother. She's Nancy Brown. I should also thank her for putting me in this position. You know, she was very focused and direct when I heard this from her. And it's one of those things that at the moment, you know, it sounds one way, but in hindsight, I think it's pushed me into a different direction. I remember playing Nintendo and hearing her as she passed by under her breath, or maybe not so much under her breath, that games, what a waste of time. I also recall hearing, are you always going to be a C student? I was somebody who didn't excel very much in high school. And I think that's also what drives the work that I'm doing. But what I've realized coming out of that and reflecting now on that statement, or those statements in that time, is that games really helped me to identify and understand my identity. It gave me an opportunity to become confident in my skills. It gave me an opportunity to excel in my intellect. The thing that we'll sort of talk about as I move down the path and take you on this journey with me is that it squarely lands in this question of criticality. What do games and what does technology mean for people of color today? And ultimately, I think we all play games for joy. A lot of that joy, I think, gets lost as we get older and more mature, and the games that we play might not look so much like games anymore, but joy is really important. And I touch on these five, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if you guys can hear that. I'm trying to turn off these things that are going to start popping up. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with these five five sort of aspects. These five aspects: identity, skills, intellect, and criticality, come from a framework by Dr. Goldie Muhammad. She's diligently working to improve the academic outcomes of Black and Brown children through literacy and through her culturally responsive framework that is built on the concept that historically, from the 18 and 1900s, the Black literate society squarely aligned to 4 or 5 aspects when teaching literacy. And those were creating a sense of identity, skills, intellect, criticality, and joy. It's some of the work that I've just started to engage with to get a much better understanding of what other thoughts and ideas are going on in the space. I find it a great opportunity to take other people's thinking and then reflect on it. How does that fit into games? I believe games and game developers can leverage these same frameworks, this one in particular, to not only produce better games, but also create more opportunities for new designers to see themselves in the practice of game design, especially creators of color. But when I reflect on this and thinking back on that day, I'm seeing more than just a waste of time, right? And I think as I stand here, you probably are getting a sense that I'm not only going to sit in games as being a waste in time or an indulgence or something that's handled only at the leisure as an option for leisure or play. I think games, we should think of them not as a lone isolated activity or even a group activity with no consequences, but instead as the culmination of the sum of all of our experiences in the world. This is really what digital brings to us. And when I'm talking about games and thinking about games, I'm really trying to sort of land this idea that it brings everything together. It does something more than I feel that movies and books do, where they sort of transport us into a world. I think games become that fully immersive world where it's really about engagement and interaction. It goes from passive to active. And I think that's why they're so unique and can be so compelling. And I think the research is starting to show this more and more. As we all become players in different types of games and in different spaces, I talk to people a lot. They're like, I don't play games. And then we sort of open their phone or move to other places within their life. And then we realize, well, actually that is a game and you're actually involved in it and deeply involved. The engagement is rich and you almost have no choice but to become engaged. And I think it's for those reasons that I am all in on games. So we're going to take a little bit of a journey today, and I'm going to move fluidly between playing and designing. So things are going to become a bit blended when I'm talking about playing and designing. That's really where I'm going to set the foundation of this conversation. I'm going to talk about that and be very intentional about having things blur between playing and designing. I see playing as an extension of designing. If we think of books, authors write books with the intention to have them read, and the more that a person reads, the better potential they have to be a better writer, and if they so desire, to be an author. Games work very similarly. As I play more as a designer, I better understand the engagement, what engagement and playing means. And as I or we in this conversation think about design and design experiences, and we engage with those more frequently, we have a better understanding of what it means to play. It's reciprocal in my mind. With that, we're going to cover 3 basic things. Again, the foundation, how I'm thinking about building new designers and players. That's going to sit squarely in identity, because I think identity is really important. We're also going to cover the opportunities that are out there. And within identity exists the ability for designers to express skills and intellect, and for players to learn those skills and intellect. Opportunity is really this space that I'm expecting the knowledge transfer to happen, where I'm going from getting the opportunity to sit and listen to become the opportunity to engage. And what does it mean to engage? Do I have the skills to engage? Do I have the intellect to engage, and what comes out of that engagement? The last part is really the model. And I think this is where, I've been sort of working through this deck over the last few weeks, this presentation. And I think this is where a lot of things have begun to open up for me. And I'm starting to peel back the onion on what I think is really important in digital today and what digital equity means and how I think games can help to bring that to many communities, but primarily in the under-resourced and underrepresented and underserved communities. The model, again, is where my business, Harlem CoLab, is looking to build capacity through internships, clients and partnerships, to build a community of creatives and technologists. Harlem CoLab is this initial pilot for programs in training, is starting right here, of course, in the name, in Harlem. So let's start with the foundation. As I mentioned before, I start, and in my practice as a designer and in my practice as a player, the things that I'm looking for in games that I play and games that I create is, how do I connect to the game? What does the game mean to me? This also leverages the framework that I had spoken about before from Goldie Muhammad, and I think it's really important because it's helped the light to turn on for me. And it really sits in identity. As a designer, I think it's important to be empathetic to my players. And in order to be empathetic to them, I need to really understand who they are. And I need to understand what motivates them, what gets them to play. So what I want to do is I'm going to flip the script just a little bit here. And I'm going to encourage people. I'm going to encourage people to be vulnerable. And I'm going to do that by making myself vulnerable and showing that this is a very safe space to share. I think we have the Q&A available. And what I'd like to do is just, I guess one of the things when I'm giving presentations, I'm usually in a meeting mode, and it's easy to see my respondents in their faces, even if it's just avatars. Some people have their screens open and their videos open. Since I don't have that, I'd love to open up the opportunity for the people that are here in the space with me to share one of their identities or a few of their identities. And I'm going to model that first. This is a very safe space. Anytime that you are sharing a space with me, whether it's in a classroom or in a Zoom, on a lecture, I want everyone to be their true and authentic selves, because that's really what's most important in order for us to move together as a humanity. It's important to break down those barriers and for us to be vulnerable and understand that we can share who we are and it's okay. So I think this is possible. I hope it is. Hope I get a few responses. But what I'd like you to do after I share who I am, you're reading it right now, but I'm gonna actually say it and name it for you. I'd love to take a few moments just to see who is in the room. This is the best way for me to connect to you, so I really encourage it. And I think we can use the Q&A to just type simple line statements the way I have. You don't have to give your name, that can be anonymous, but I'd love to have an understanding of who's in the space with me. So my name, as I share my identity, is Dennis. You guys already know that. I'm Dennis Morgan. I'm a father and a husband. It's my lovely family there. I am Black. That's how I identify. I'm a bundle scholar. I'm an activist. I'm a game designer. I'm a creative. I've recently been taking up the piano and have been really enjoying creating music, some of it written, some not written. I'm a product designer, so a lot of the professional work that I do is about coming up with digital solutions for companies. I'm a basketball player. You might not have guessed that looking at me. You can't tell how tall I am. I'm not very tall, but it is one of my favorite sports. And then the list goes on and on. That one that's cut off at the bottom is intentional. I'm a product manager, a product designer. I build products, generally digital products. So I don't know, George, if this is something we can do. I think you should be able to type some, I'll give like just a minute and a half, if that. It's going to be a little quiet for me. But if you can just share one of your identities, it can be as intimate and personal or not as personal, if you'd like.
I think, oh, there we go. Got it.
Looks like it's working. Yeah, and again, this is just so, like, again, in this format that we're delivering, it's hey Pam, it's a little it's tough for me to see your faces. So yes, if you're comfortable sharing, I really appreciate it. Just helps me get a sense of who's in the room. That's great. It's awesome. We have such diversity in the room, and I really appreciate that. That's the stuff that keeps me going. I'm a dog lover too, Lorena. The recent parent of a dog. I guess we can call ourselves parent. We have an adoptee in the house. Not yeah, an adoptee. Oh, yeah. So there is someone that says, I am a Black woman, I'm a writer, I am an archivist, I am a design critic, uh, I am Chinese Canadian, I enjoy playing tennis and Legos. I should read some of them. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm a mother, I am a basketball fan. You go really far. I am Korean American, I'm an executive director, I'm a DJ. Yeah, so I mean, what this really starts to do for me as a designer, it starts to open up the space on how do I communicate? What are the things that people are accustomed to? The other thing that's really important about identity, thank you so much for sharing, by the way. Let me recognize that people have shared and that they've made themselves vulnerable. Thank you so much. It helps me to understand where I am in the space and who's in the space with me. Oh, that slide was supposed to come up. Anyway, so what's important to game designers, right? So again, I'm going to be blending between play and design for the first few sections of this. It's how we learn about ourselves and about others, right? The identity is so important, whether it's designers or even in life, right? The more that we can start to understand about one another, it helps to drive the conversation forward. It helps me as a designer, as I imagine for some of you, to feel empathy. It helps us to communicate our lived experience, right? My identity helps me to communicate to you the things that I've been through, the things that make me unique, and the things that make me the same as you. Um, and the last part, and I think this is what's key, is as I start to as you take this journey with me, and we start to get down to the model and how I think this works to close the gap in digital equity. It's really about building confidence and self-awareness, right? The more aware we are as people, the more we understand who we are in the spaces that we're in, the more confidence it can build for us, the more opportunities for acceptance. And as a designer, I know I'm talking about things that are really like psychological and probably a bit more about human development, but those are the things that are key to building great design games. The more I understand about my players, the better I can communicate an experience, the more specific I can be about what we're doing and why I have you doing that. So I'm just going to let's take a quick look and this is just a quick example of what it looks like in games. So I chose this one intentionally. This is a game called Elder Rings. It's a newer game. It's what they call an RPG, a role-playing game. It lives in a space as a first person. You look at the game through a first person, but it allows, actually third person, I'm sorry. The camera is raised above the player and it can rotate around the player. It's not through the player's eyes. But in games, we can be who we want to be, right? In this case, this person, it looks like Samuel L. Jackson, if I'm not wrong, with some wild hair. So they offer us, games have the technology and the ability. So as a designer, when I'm building an opportunity for people to express themselves, the questions that I bring up to my class and I bring up to you today, if we were all on a journey to become game designers together, I would ask, does it make sense for the game to have the ability to create whoever you want? Or do you constrain it to force the player to play as someone you want them to be, to have an intentionally designed experience where I want you to be this type of person. I want you to identify in this way. The question that comes out of that is what then is given to the player when they come out of the game and engage themselves in the real world? Can we create opportunities for people to see themselves in the game and then bring those identities out into the real world? these are behaviors that exist, but the questions that I bring to my class as I'm talking about design is, how do we intentionally do that? So behaviors that we've seen before in games is people engage in cosplay, right? So I might create an experience that I don't even know is going to intend that people start to dress up like the characters in the game. These are sort of outputs of it. Whoops, let me get my cursor over here. And sometimes unintentional. I'm just going to state that we have a way to do, we do have a way to do this in games. We intentionally design these spaces and experiences for players to express who they are. As designers, we have intentionally designed the ability to freely express, and in some case, designed constraints. So just touching on that same part. Something that I want you to think about as you go into games or play and engage in experiences, do you have the opportunity to create who you are? Is it important for you in that experience to create who you are? Do you wish that it was there? These are also the questions that I raise as part of my practice. So again, identity helps us to know our players, allows players to know themselves. And then this really rich space that I'm really trying to explore and determine is, can we intentionally transfer players' knowledge of self from the real world into the game and vice versa? Because I feel like that real win is vice versa, right? I can have you play an experience as someone in the game and you walk out of the game with that understanding or that context or that identity to some extent. We're finding a lot of research is showing that when we are creating 3D virtual environments and people are engaging with those huge monitors on their face, that we can create experiences that build really deep empathy. And this is the question, what's available to us as designers? So let's talk a little bit about opportunity. Opportunities for others is really what I'm getting at. This isn't about the opportunities that I've been afforded. I feel like I could talk about those forever. But as a designer, what's really important is what opportunities am I affording to my players? And then as I start to expand this conversation to digital equity, what opportunities are there out there for everyone to engage in the digital space? Do we have enough tools for everyone? Does everyone have the same access? By exposing design concepts, tools, some of the partners I work with, I believe we stand a greater chance to reach youth. And I think that's really where the opportunities lie. I think back to, I'm not going to share the entire story, but one of the opportunities that I had as a young person was actually to visit a McDonald's. I don't know if this is the best story, but I got an opportunity to visit a McDonald's as a young child and see what was happening in the background. And you know, it's funny, that whole thing stuck with me. I don't know why. I think it was because I saw, this is not the right idiom, but I saw how they were making the sausage and it stuck with me. Not necessarily to eat there or not, like from a health perspective, like let's keep that off to the side. But what it showed me was what happens to people that are in there? How does the product come to me and who's making the product? What does it take to make the product? That stuck with me, and it helps me now to understand that if I can expose more young people to the tools that build the tech and I can be thoughtful about how that happens, that I think the opportunities become much more clear to them as they get older, right? The future can be with more technological possibilities. And from what I've seen in my practice as an entrepreneur, as an activist, is that the key is to bring those industries and those industry standards into the classroom. So right now, when we teach coding, we're teaching it as a concept and a framework. And I think what's really important is to show it as a career opportunity. What does it mean as I teach you to code? And what does that look like in the real world? Where does code exist? How can you manipulate that code? It might be a little bit more challenging for some of the younger learners, and we have to be age appropriate. But from what I believe we have the most value and opportunity in, is really bringing those real world experiences. So one of the partnerships that I've been working with has been to bring machine visioning to a middle school classroom. And giving them an opportunity to see how the future of machines and how recognizing images on Google, like all of those opportunities become jobs in the future. And by making these connections, I feel like we have the opportunity to spark their minds and their possibilities. So skills are the other place where I think it's most important. And this is where, again, blending between design and designer, player and designer, what's important is to teach the skills to create games with a broader spectrum of purpose and inclusivity. And additionally, playing games, right? So I break this into two things, teaching and playing. So when playing games, can we get them to develop the experience that teaches the skills beyond the game? So again, just as I'm framing identity and saying, can identity be recognized in the game and then pulled out into the real world? The same question goes into skills. Can I teach a skill in the game and have that skill transferable into the real world? If we think about the mechanics in games, if I sort of list those out in front of you, and I'm going to go through this exercise in just a bit, we learn to kick, we learn to punch, we learn to shoot, we learn to jump. Most of the main commercial games that are out there teach a very specific behavior. And I think the question in the research that's been going around is like, do those behaviors find their way into the real world? Where I feel that a lot of where we should be thinking as game designers is not so much in the kick, punch, shoot, jab, duck, right? Those actions, those mechanics. But can we start to think about other things like smile, love, participate, right? Collaborate, right? There's collaboration games out there, but can we be more intentional? Hug, right? Can hug be a mechanic that we can then start to bring into the real world? What do those games look like? And how do we design with that intentionally? So as part of that, trying to get into a place that provides an opportunity to create games with a broader spectrum of purpose, as part of my practice and what I continue to teach is something called the four-field framework. This is a framework that I've adopted into my practice. It's a design framework that was developed by designers and educators, frustrated by the lack of holistic design frameworks that could be used to evaluate design exercises and initiatives beyond what is traditionally looked at as successful design, which is usually an industrial and product design, like the things that sit in our space, my computer, my phone, my lights. And really their goal was to get beyond that, to think beyond the traditional rubrics and curricula. I'm not going to get into every facet of this, but I do want to spend some time on a couple things. So the four-field framework really focuses across commercial. So how do we identify a game or a product that sells? It goes into responsible. So how do we build or design with responsibility in mind? Responsibility maybe within the cohort or the group or the target that's going to use it, or even for responsibility for the environment, something that can perish or be used for a long time without having any disruption to the environment. It also deals with experimental. So are we building with the purpose to try something new? A lot of times that's the case, but it's not always thought of as the most important thing or the highest priority in the designer's mind. And if it is, what then does that look like? And discursive. And by discursive, it's, can I create something that forces us to talk and really have a meaningful conversation about what's in front of us? So again, I'm not going to get into all of these, but I will talk about a couple of them. I believe that this framework gives designers a tool that improves their ability to identify what we are designing for and how to amplify that purpose. For instance, if I'm thinking about designing a device to deliver coffee at home for a commercial market, I'm going to design with specific goals in mind. I'm going to design with form and function at the top of the list. I'm going to design something that can be produced at scale, right? So how do I get the materials? How do I know that I can reproduce that consistently and get it into everyone's household? I might not prioritize responsible design meaning designing with the environment in mind. So if I look at this, I have this product at home and I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite things. Um, but it's designed to become invisible in a lot of ways. It's designed to become uh, an art piece, I feel. Like I think it's very beautiful, is my personal opinion. And the fact that it's sort of, you take your coffee pot, it goes into the hole, you pull the lever down and it disappears, like you never see it again in a lot of ways. And this coffee, this liquid that tastes incredible comes out. Um, like I, those are really intentional design decisions and things that when they're thinking about commercial success come to the forefront. Those bubble up to the top. Um, but if we are designing and we have supply chain in mind, right? Does this help to accomplish that? Uh, I might try to incorporate some responsible practices if I was designing this, right? Who produces the coffee? Can I change the supply chain, or can I manipulate the supply chain so more people from a specific region are less advantaged, right? And can I be responsible about that? I might generate a standard or a measure to ensure that all producers of color, right, are featured or something like that. Some of the times Nespresso does this. I'll consider what the product looks like in my home. I touched on that. Again, I'm thinking commercially, but the other thing to point out is I'm not prioritizing experimentation or experimenting. This needs to be tried and true and very specific and something that people can adopt without having to think, what am I doing? These things are important, but less important, right? Things like responsibility, right? Things like experimentation, things like discourse, right? I might not create something that encourages people to sit and talk about whether or not this is the right coffee maker or this is the right process for creating coffee. I want this to be a single function where I get my coffee and I'm able to move on. But if I flip this, right, and we think about a game product that I wanted to use in education for maybe a classroom of high schoolers or college students, what if the game was a way to experience the slave trade as it affected North America? What if it was to force a conversation between the players or the students or the people engaged with the game that invited the discourse and the unpacking of what the game looked like from the perspective of underrepresented communities, maybe even more about how history is told through the lens of writers about the underrepresented community and not told from the perspective of the underrepresented community, right? So if I wanted to create a game that looked at the historical narrative through the lens of the writers of history versus the people who were subjugated through that history, right? What does that game look like? Of course, you can imagine I've got something just for that. I might end up with something that looks like this. So this is a game that I use often in my class. And it's an incredibly well-designed game in that it really brings the conversation forward on what and how did the slave trade impact North America at the moment, during the eras that it existed. This game is called Freedom, the Underground Railroad. It's by Brian Meyer. He uses this game as part of his middle school and high school curriculum, I believe. And they play this game as they go through their section or their segment about slavery in North America. It's quite a compelling game. It gives players these decisions, meaningful decisions, which is also a really key part to making really good games. These really meaningful decisions about who moves forward, which slaves are allowed to move forward, and by allowed I mean how many can you get to the north? The goal is to go from the south, from the southern plantations to Canada, and which slaves won't make it. Really tough decisions, but an incredibly thoughtful and designed game, and one that fits really squarely in education, and forces us to think about things really differently and the decisions that were made. Just another shot of the game board fully laid out. Highly recommended. It is they'd say this is a Euro style game. It's a little hard to get moving if you're new to games that require a lot of thought. But I'd highly recommend it. It's one that once you get it, and if you're into games that get you to think, then this would be a really good game for you. All right. So we've covered a lot about design and how design can be used to build better games, as well as designers. And I've talked about how I believe these skills can be transferred from players into designers, at least loosely. But I'd like to talk a bit deeper about this and attempt to sort of land this idea on what a model for bringing the underserved and underrepresented population into tech roles and positions, and ultimately tech jobs, what that really looks like. And I've had some opportunities lately. It's funny as this presentation, this lecture has come up. I've been in a lot of different spaces, even just this week, where I've been talking to people about digital equity and the research and the work that they're doing in the space. Had an opportunity to sit with some folks from the Rand Corporation and hear their ideas and to, at least in part where I'm at with this and how I'm planning to attack the problem. Because ultimately what I'm looking to do is change the pipeline so it has greater representation of folks that look like me. I found a lot of where 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, and even just last year, I feel like I've been in this space by myself. It was really great. This week has really opened up a lot of things for me and given me an opportunity to really see how other people of color are trying to solve the problem that we've all been squarely looking at. And what that tells me is, number one, this is the right work for me to be doing and for the Harlem CoLab to be doing, and why it makes sense now. And in addition to that, it's also told me that there are other people that I can partner with. There's other people who are thinking about it the same way that can learn from what I'm doing, as well as I can learn from what they're doing. So this last part within Dr. Muhammad's framework, one of the areas that she strongly addresses is criticality. And I'm going to take you, let me just grab some water, sorry. Take you through just another story here, because criticality is really important. And I think the question that I have here, why aren't there more people that look like me in tech roles? And how can we change that, is really sort of what sort of sticks with me. And it is really the problem that I'm trying to solve. But let me tell you how I sort of came to this. I was having a chat. This is all really recent for me, which is interesting. Having a chat with my wife maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago. I do speak to my wife very oftenly, and I have her to thank and my family to thank for getting a chance to do lectures like this and really drive this business as I feel it should be driven. But I was having to talk with my wife, and it sparked a really interesting note in me that was rooted in what she had been reading. She was the one that passed this book on to me from Dr. Muhammad. And my wife posed this question when we were talking about the work that she was reading. What does criticality look like in games? And I sort of sat with that, and it started all these, I think I was silent for at least 20 or 30 seconds, and I'm like, what? It shifted my head. I didn't know necessarily how to process it or what it actually meant, but it sounded really interesting. And I heard her. And as much as she might say, I don't listen, it got me thinking. What if I could, as a designer, target criticality as a mechanic in a game? What if I tried making a game that used players' understanding of inequity as a mechanic in a game? So just really quickly, I mentioned this before, just to further explain this concept using some game language, I promise to get back to this model. But in games, the mechanics are usually or generally verbs. What a player can do, for instance, and I listed these before. We can punch, we can jump, we can shoot, we can jab, we can deal, as in deal cards if we're playing a card game. We can draw cards, you can discard, you can roll, you can move. So those familiar with probably that's a good one. So Monopoly, right? That's a roll and move game. It has some cards that you can pick up and discard. If we think about Scrabble, right? Scrabble is a tile placement game. You can place tiles. These are all mechanics in a game that produce an effect or an outcome. So it got me thinking, how might I tie a mechanic to criticality? So I sat with me for a while. And I realized the critical question wasn't necessarily about how I would build a game or teach how to build a game, but was really about my business. It was really about the CoLab, Harlem CoLab. And the question, how might I build a real world mechanic? Hiring, hire, teaching, teach, train, training that could change the pipeline for what businesses traditionally do and what I believe needs to happen to make meaningful and impactful change in people's and companies' lives. Are there ways to sort of disrupt or rethink or re-envision or envision in general new mechanics that bring more people that look like me into the pipeline? So this is where it started, right? Harlem CoLab. I've moved from the foundation to the opportunity, and now we're going to look at the model. And this model, as I had kind of mentioned before, you saw a couple slides of kids, it began thinking back to the impact that I had at my children's school. I created something called the FEST, F-E-S-T, the Fair for the Environment, Science, and Technology. And this again comes out of me recognizing that when tech is brought into a school, we sit the kids generally, not all the time, we sit the children at computers. We let them engage with whatever the curriculum is through that computer, through that interface. And that's more or less tech, right? That's tech. We might teach them to code. Again, really theoretical concepts. How do I move this object from one space to another? Totally useful, incredibly useful. But the thing that I'm really trying to push toward is how do I spark that interest in the child? How do I get them to think, again, like me at McDonald's, that this isn't just an experience behind the scenes at McDonald's, but there's a real world product and a real world job that sits here. Not that everyone should be trying to get a job at McDonald's, or even that everyone should be trying to get a job in tech, right? That's not the case. What I'm trying to do is really change the pipeline of resources that are going into tech so that people like me have more of an opportunity. They feel like, or they can feel like, it's a space that they belong. What we often hear, and I'm sharing some of the learnings that came out of the conversation I had this week, what we often hear is that people don't feel like they have permission to be in that space. What the research has shown is that companies aren't hiring people of color or people that look like me because they don't feel that they've got the training to take those jobs. Now, unpacking that in this conversation is probably going to be really difficult. And we're probably going to have to walk out of here, again, norming the space with an understanding that we won't solve the problem today. And I'm not here to say that my Harlem CoLab is going to solve the problem. But I think it helps to, if I think about that four-field framework, I think it allows us to have a discourse and to talk about what the problems might be and how we might find a way around them. And where this sort of took me, this Harlem CoLab, is it formulated a new question. How might we, or I, create a pipeline of people who look like me in the tech industry? What's it going to take? And from those thoughts, what are the verbs that exist to help create a real world mechanic that I and other businesses, right? Because if I'm really being smart about this, it doesn't necessarily have to be Harlem CoLab is the only thing that does this, right? What I want to do is provide a framework for thought, a framework for entrepreneurship, either for people from my community or for people from other communities, right? And how do we create an amplified pipeline that has more people, again, that look like me? And in positions to make the hires. That's one last thing. The other thing that comes out of the conversations that I've been having this week is, I guess for quite some time, have been making sure that we have people in the positions to make those hires. So bringing in a bunch of low-level programmers with no opportunity to move up is not, and I'll get to some of this as I go a little bit further and we get closer to the end here. If we don't have people in a place to make the decisions, then the pipeline has a lot of challenges in changing. We can all work to put them in positions to become hired, but if they're not getting the go-ahead and they're walking into the room and not being fully prepared, or the people that are expected to receive them are not prepared, then we run into a number of other problems. And that brought me to this. So solving 21st century workforce problems by providing 21st century skills. And that's really where things had sort of landed for me probably in the last month or so. What I've learned as part of this program is that it's okay to be fluid, especially as I'm going through the Bundle Scholars program and I'm engaging with people who are helping to change my thoughts and change them, I feel, for the better. I think like I was saying, I think that's okay. It's okay to allow my thoughts to change, especially if it's for creating a better world. So this is where I started, right? Solving problems, provide skills. Solving digital problems in skills, and how can I teach this? So these are really the three things that the Harlem CoLab, these are the pillars, right, that I really stand on. And what I'm really building capacity to do, and where I'm looking to extend my practice and bring in more partners. I'm looking to upskill young learners and career-ready adults. Those are really my two primary markets. Those are the ones that come into the CoLab and are seeing the greatest benefit. But it's these last two, delivering digital products to clients and creating opportunities with corporate partners, that I've really been able to sort of build capacity over the last few years. These are the two where I know that if I can expand and build out my business to bring more in, then I know that I've got all the opportunities that I need for more people to come through that look like me. So for clients, Harlem CoLab specializes in workplace training and talent development programs that will help you create a diverse and competitive workforce while ensuring your company remains competitive in today's evolving economy. So that's my tagline. That's the sales pitch, and that's sort of where I've landed it. This is really, about changing the pipeline. And when I'm talking about changing the pipeline, I'm talking about workplace training, talent development, in order to create a diverse, competitive workforce while ensuring companies remain competitive. And I think that's what's really important. In order for Harlem CoLab to be successful, I have to stay on top of technology. I have to be aware of what's happening in the industry. And that's where I realized that I've gotten really good, right? Meeting the right people, having the right conversations, creating the right opportunities. If you look at this slide that I have here, I've got two types of clients, if you want to call them that. I have clients and partners. I currently have a few contracts with clients that are allowing me to bring other people on board to teach them the skills that I have on project management, Web3 solutions, gamification, UX and UI, like all of the things that help to build digital experiences. Those are the type of clients that I'm looking for. Those are the type of clients that I'm creating solutions for. On the other side, something that I don't think I was even aware of prior to two or three years ago, is that I can actually make connections to corporations, understanding the strengths of their core competency and creating those opportunities for people that come through the Harlem CoLab. I've been doing that work in particular with what's called the Titans program. And this was such a unique opportunity, and two other people that I really have to thank who are part of the Successful Steps program. So Successful Steps is one of the contracts that I have, and I work with Successful Steps to create digital tech programming, computer labs, all sorts of tech opportunities where whether I'm teaching or providing internship opportunities, which this sort of leans into. It does more than leans into, it actually nails it. So Janisha Metcalf is a very close partner and friend of mine, and Noble Voorhees, along with Abraham House, are really the core of Successful Steps. And what Successful Steps does is it looks really clearly at the community, and it is expanded to all of Greater New York to provide opportunities for, I'm trying to remember the names, I'm sorry, it escapes me as my mind's sort of racing right now. For help if you need help in the community, mental health services, that's the word I was looking for. Also, they have a food pantry in the South Bronx that allows basic needs. They also provide professional development. The one thing that we really nailed over the last couple years has been these micro scholarships, $2,000-3,000 for students that need help and assistance that isn't at the large scholarship fund, but things that really help them close the gap. So Successful Steps has been really good at delivering that. I think we've delivered out. If Janisha was here, she would tell you hundreds of thousands of dollars in scholarships for a number of people over the last 2 years. It's been a great program of which I've been happy to be involved with and look forward to future partnerships. But where this really sort of lands is that we've created a tech industry training and new skills program, the Titans program, partnering with Whole Foods to provide first and second year college students who are NYCHA residents, first and second year generation college as well, living at or below the poverty line. So we've created a paid internship. We as in Harlem CoLab, with the support of Successful Steps, have created a partnership with Whole Foods to give 1 to 2 people for the next 10 weeks, it starts in June, an opportunity to learn asset protection. And what I want to be really specific about is asset protection in this case is not just the security guard at the front. This is really about the high-tech skills that are needed. So what's happening in retail now is that things like machine visioning, consumer analytics, data analytics are becoming the key skills that are needed to really drive asset protection in retail. This is the space where where I have identified, along with Whole Foods, ways to bring more people that look like me into the tech pipeline. And again, we wouldn't think of Whole Foods as like a strictly tech company, but the more you go in there, you take a look around and you see the workforce that they have. I want you to be aware of everyone who has an app in their hand and is using that technology to satisfy or fulfill people's retail orders. Think about the machines that are sitting behind or in front of the registers. There's tech all over that place. And this is really the space that I'm trying to start to understand and trying to find more partnerships. So how do we draw them in? How do we attract people into the Harlem CoLab? Through outreach, of course, through my connections in education, and of course, through joy. This is really where games come in. I have been looking at games as the gateway. The thing that I believe can be used to bring people into the space. If I can play with them, then I believe that I can turn them into designers, or at least draw the interest out of them, right? To have a real conversation about, do you know how this was made? Sure, we're playing it, sure, it's happening, but how does this get in front of you? How does it get on your phone? How does it get on your screen? How does it get into the PlayStation? This isn't easy work. It's not super easy to pick up and just do, but it's something that helps to start teaching the technical vocabulary, right? We're talking about things that bring that digital equity gap closer, smaller and smaller, right? If I learn how to speak the language, if I learn how the language is being used around me, I have more of an opportunity to engage in the conversation. The thing that I really love about games is that it includes all of the art disciplines, copywriting, audio design. Has even beyond that, it has project management or management in general, team management, visual designs and animation, game design, of course. And now, as we're looking at the world that is to come to us, Web3, so NFTs, AI, VR, AR, any sort of acronym you can come up with, I'm sure we're going to get into them very soon. But games focus across all disciplines. And this is really where I think we have the opportunity. Games bring skills that are needed for the future of technology and to reach of our candidates. This is where I believe the joy exists for all. What tends to be difficult is that games tend to be locked up. The industry itself, if you haven't delivered a game, it's really hard to get in. So if I find that people want to engage with that, then I want to create that space. If I'm finding that people or some of the candidates that come through might be more interested in getting jobs outside of that, maybe they want a banking job in fintech, financial technology, or they're looking for a job in NFT or some other marketing organization. what I believe that games do is sets that foundation for us. So what we're working on at Harlem CoLab. So this is a game that that I'm currently in design with, that I'm thinking through and starting to bring to life, although slowly. This really lands on how, I'm really looking for the opportunity to teach players to become philanthropists. So this game is called Skate Free. Skate Free is a virtual dance hall on wheels. It's gliding, hip hop. It's all the things skate. It's culture, fashion, language. It's roller skate tech. And the goal behind this game is not just to be a place to play or a multiplayer place to play, but it's really about building, how do I teach players to become philanthropists? So 10%, the plan right now is that the 10% of the total revenue contributes to what's called a skate-free grant. And again, teaching what grants are, having people understand what that means, which prioritizes skate culture projects, creating a sustainable revenue stream for the skater community. So what I've learned in the research that I've been doing on skater culture, and this isn't skateboarding as much as it's roller skating, is that to run a roller skating rink is actually very expensive. And because of the price point, it makes it really difficult to keep those things sustainable. It's also a space that is frequently visited and utilized by the Black and Brown community. So these are spaces that are going away and spaces that I want to look for ways to help to sustain. And again, as I mentioned, if people don't want to build games, that's perfectly fine. I'm just using them as a platform in order to get technology skills. And I think what's really the most important thing and where I've really landed in the last, short period of time, is that I'm thinking about a new agency model. That this is no longer about just 24th century skills and 21st century workforce. That is it. But what it's really about is a new digital agency, one that prioritizes skills and workforce. It isn't just about how do I keep my pockets fat, right? Keep the company growing. Like that's important. But if I can start to rethink what it means to be part of the CoLab and how that builds you out and builds you up, you as a candidate, and makes it possible for you to become a technologist or a creator in the digital space, then I think that's where, it becomes the really rewarding experience for not just me, but the partners that are involved. We're not necessarily looking to hold all of our candidates within our organization. If they want, they can go out and explore, and we actually encourage that. But it's in that encouragement, right? So game projects support large teams, but I think what's really important is if people do exit the CoLab and move into these other organizations or these partner organizations, these client organizations, then I've got to be really thoughtful about support. And I think this is the other space that becomes really ripe, which is really about the HR function. So human resources have traditionally been put in place to protect the company. But what I've been thinking about more as the Harlem CoLab is that we actually have an obligation to our candidates to provide them social emotional support. So as I am coming out of an under-resourced or underserved community and moving into a space where I might not feel as though I have access or privilege to be in, that takes on a lot of stress, right? There's a lot of things, and right now, I do not believe in my experience that I've had. I'd love to hear something different, that HR companies or HR within companies are really about the social emotional support outside of the corporation. So when I go home, who's there for me? Is my boss calling me, making sure that I'm okay, making sure that my living situation is okay, right? This is a ripe space. And whether it's through the Harlem CoLab or other businesses, it's something that I believe that through the Harlem CoLab, we can start the discourse and we can start to have the conversation. Additionally, as more people who look like me move into the space, it's really important, this goes back to something I talked about before, that we provide some level of support to the leadership of the intake company, right? So how do they know how to communicate? What does it mean when, you're looking to make the hire and then move somebody up? how much of the top line, or the executives within the corporation, how much are they saying diversity for theater versus really being about diversity, really saying we want VPs that are Latin women or LGBTQ men or whatever it is in our leadership, right? Where are they really making this happen? How do you help them get to that place? This is really where DEI comes in. And it's a place where I have the Harlem CoLab, and I as Harlem CoLab have lots of experience. Taken many companies from a place where they don't know how to do it to giving them a framework and a roadmap on how to do it and coaching them through. So this is really where it all sort of lands. I'm in the process right now through the Bundle Scholar program, building capacity, building a pipeline of corporate partners, looking for more opportunities for that. I'm seeking funding to create those game projects, right? So if games are the space that teach the skills, I now, as you can see from the first part, have a pedagogy or an understanding of how to teach that so that the skills become transferable and build the confidence in the people who I'm working with so that they can take on those future jobs, so that I can start to create that community of candidates. And ultimately, a lot of this, in order to make it run, is to build the internal expertise through the digital projects. So the more digital projects we have coming through, the more opportunities I have to turn people into the future technologists and creators. I've thrown a lot at you. I would hope that, well, I shouldn't hope, I'm sure there are a lot of questions. But I hope this has been really helpful to understand what we're looking to do and how I'm focused on building the Harlem CoLab for the future.
Thank you, Dennis. Inspiring and intriguing as always. Thank you. That was great. And we do have some questions, so I'll just jump in. You and the Harlem CoLab introduce games and technology to various audiences, from middle school students to career-ready adults. If you can generalize, what do these disparate audiences have in common, and how do their work and outcomes differ? So I guess the question is about, going in and then coming out. Are there differences? You mentioned finding joy. Is that the crucial element in all of your clients and partners?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you very much. So the thing that they share in common is access. So what I've started to realize is that the access to those digital skills, the access to those digital tools, is lacking across the board. And it's really the space where I think both can come in. So there was one element of that slide that I totally flipped through. So maybe if anybody has time to rewatch that whole thing that took an hour to get through, there's one part that's really about 2Gen. So not just teaching the child, but teaching the caregiver. And in this case, the caregiver could be that career-ready adult, making sure that they all have the same access and the same ability, because you start to get even better learning when both generations are engaged. Like that would be an ultimate goal. So that's the first thing that they have in common. The access is the piece. The outcomes, I feel like, the experience that I've had with the career-ready adults is they love making games. Some of the times it helps to flip a switch in them that's like, hey, actually, I could do this. But a lot of times they need to eat tomorrow, right? They need to feed their family tomorrow. So a lot of times these partnerships and these internships are really more of what they're looking for. The children are not going to be as engaged with that, but what I'm really working with the schools that I'm working with in District 3 to do is, again, bring the real world technology to them. I have a couple talks that are coming up and some career days that are coming up in the month of May for a couple schools here, one in Harlem, one on the Lower East Side, where I'm going to talk just about that, right? Like making sure that it's very clear that I am somebody standing in front of you that didn't have all the opportunities, but have really tried to engage in what can I do now? Now that I understand that I didn't have opportunity, I do have opportunity. How do I transfer that opportunity onto you? How do I get you to start thinking about the stuff that excites me? I think that's really where I'm starting to see the difference. The younger kids need to be brought into it so that they can understand the world is huge. They know that, but a lot of times they want to be the basketball player, they want to be the singer. I'd love for them to come to me and say, I'd love to be the next game designer, or I'd love to be the next doctor, or the next dentist, or the next mechanic, right? Like really want them to know that the world is what's in front of them. I'd love to see them in tech, but if something else drives them, then there's that.
Great, thank you. And please, everyone should put questions into the Q&A. Another question, I recently learned that shockingly, the United States ranks 24th worldwide in internet access. And I understand the Harlem community has particular difficulties in internet access. Can you address this aspect of the digital divide and its causes? For example, is it about the technology and the equipment, or is it about the expense of Wi-Fi access and affordability or availability? And you talk about, access and also removing barriers. Is this a barrier that you're even able to, have you come across it? And is this a barrier that's pervasive, and how, if at all, can you address that? I guess the question is about access, equipment, and also Wi-Fi, which is global. But
yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, no, I get it, George. And just, yeah, if I miss one thing, please let me know, just bring it back up. So access is really important. Access not just to the tools, but how do I connect? So a lot of times I have the advantage, I'm going to be completely transparent. A lot of times I have the advantage to have the space. So in the South Bronx, at the Successful Steps Tech Center or Tech Lab, I'll call it, it's at a place called Abraham House. It's in the South Bronx. We have 25 Mac computers set up. We have Wi-Fi pumping into them. So it's a controlled environment. It's a space where if people come in, they don't have to worry about connectivity. They don't have to worry about not having the tools or devices. But what we learned coming out of COVID, especially here in New York City, I wish I had written these numbers down. I just heard them a couple of days ago, but a large population of people did not have devices to connect. And this, I'm talking about the student population, and didn't have Wi-Fi access. I think it was in the hundreds of thousands. I feel like I'm probably going to totally misquote this, so I apologize if this is incorrect. But of the 200,000 people that didn't have internet access in the state, half of those came from New York City. And I have a feeling those are numbers that were based off of noisy or faulty data that the DOE had collected. I think we've got 1 million people in our school system here in New York. And there's a large possibility that that's more than 100,000. There's more than 100,000 people who didn't have the connectivity. So yes, been up against this, seen it firsthand with the work I've been doing in the district. What we found to work is partnering with the corporations, partnering with Verizon, partnering with Spectrum, with the internet providers to create opportunities or to connect devices. And I think this goes back to like something we've all, by we, I don't know who we is, but I, and maybe many other people in the crowd have aspired to, like, why can't the internet be much more open and accessible? I think we really have to be thoughtful about who's invited in to connect, right? So I have a job, my kids don't have to worry about these things, but there are people in my community that do. And how do we create more opportunities so that we can provide that type of access? There was one other thing that I wanted to touch on. One of the things that we were talking about a couple of days ago was around this Web3, right? The metaverse. And one of the things that stuck out to me as part of this conversation is that in the US, and again, there's a few people who are working on access to these virtual environments for all people. But with that said, there's going to be some people who don't have and some people that do have in America. And what was really interesting is that the way we were talking about it, the metaverse in America is a 3D environment. We all understand it that way. We're talking about it that way. We're trying to provide access to people, whether served or underserved, with that. One of the other people in the room was talking about connectivity I believe in South Africa or areas around South Africa. And what came out is that they don't even, that's even hard to conceive for them, that access to Web3 in the metaverse is actually through flip phones. Like their technology is so far behind. So globally, we have to really think about what are we doing when we talk about access, right? If we're planning to move in this metaverse and people don't even have digital devices that can process 3D environments, right? We're starting to see a global divide, not just locally, but even globally. Um, and I think, what's most important that we raise it now and we start to have the conversation early, because like the fact that I have a concept of that now is like something I wasn't experiencing a week ago, but it allows me as a an entrepreneur or a creator or a futurist, whatever it is, like allows me to think about like, okay, then what do the games look like? What does skate free look like? How do I engage? If I only have a flip phone and only have buttons, can I make something engaging? It's a problem I don't want to have to solve, but it's a problem that gets me thinking and allows me to be really creative.
Another question refers specifically to organizations, perhaps sister organizations of yours. Opportunity at Work engages the STARS workforce, people who have a lot to offer, but do not have a college degree, which represents about half the United States. Do you know if tech companies are embracing this workforce? So obviously through your work, you are engaging and creating a pipeline, if you could address. And then also the same person asked a moment later, are you working with the Brownsville Partnership? So I don't know if this is another organization that.
Yeah, thanks for the name. I am not working with the Brownsville organization, but you're absolutely right. There are a number of programs out there. But what I've realized through the partnership that I have through Whole Foods and another one that I'm working on with another company is that a lot of times the internal programs, and I think this, I'm not sure if the STARS one is one that's from a third party that embeds into the corporation. That I'm not sure of. So if I misspeak on how they work and how Harlem CoLab works, I apologize for that. But what I'm finding is that these organizations, these corporations, either lack the access to the people that come from these communities, or they don't have the bandwidth to put the tools or the resources in place. So what's been really great about the Whole Foods partnership is that I'm starting to have conversations through their recruitment pipeline, their college recruitment, and their college internship program. And they have a goal to place X number of people into their internship, which I believe is how most of the companies are working. The question is, where is their pipeline coming from? Are they only coming from Ivy League? Are they only coming from colleges and universities that are traditionally thought of to be technology based? I think what's really important, and this is something that I've been talking with some other partners about, is like, how do we get sort of twofold? How do I get to the elementary schools that are in the underserved community so that they know that companies like Whole Foods or Peapod or Target or whoever it is, right, have opportunities for them? How do I, and that those opportunities aren't always behind a register, right? There is a workforce, although smaller, that doesn't work behind the counter. And then on the adult side, like how do we identify, or on the child side, how do we identify what schools we can go into, and how do we identify what students we can push through the pipeline? I think those are the spaces where these corporations can do more thinking. And I'm not sure again how the Rising Stars program works and how they're connecting to, but I'm finding more frequently that these companies either don't have the bandwidth or don't have the access that they need.
And this is somewhat related, and it's a big question, but you, like everyone, and the CoLab and your various programs have been through a lot in the last 2 plus years. What can you talk about that whole process, and what is the new normal for technology and education and business? And is there any upside you've seen? Is it the exposure and the fact that a lot of students and young people are communicating practically exclusively in using technology? So So that's the question
Yeah,
for us.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, what is the new normal? Where are we? What have you seen? It's a big question, but
Yeah,
with
I got
different
it.
parts.
I
But
think I understand. I think I understand, George. So new normal. So I'll go back to 2019. 2019, I had a project with the DOE here in District 3, and it was, without going too much into detail on it, there was a huge opportunity that I had layered up with the I'll speak very clearly and plainly about where it was because it's not here today. With the biobus, for those that are familiar with the biobus that are in New York City, great organization, just a beautiful program. They basically have a science center on a bus, and the bus travels around the city. They have a few of these buses. They also have a place that's up here in Harlem. It's in a Columbia building. It's an unbelievable program. The people are absolutely awesome. I had such a great relationship and experience working with them. I had the biobus and the MTA set up to start working with teachers. So again, the CoLab is really about bringing these people together. At least it was 2 or 3 years ago. Working with teachers in District 3 to create a project-based learning unit on ecosystems. So that was really where I was heading and how I was trying to build, the business and opportunities for young people. The pandemic happened and all of that stuff fell apart. And what I realized more than anything is that basic needs, like I need to make sure that I can satisfy some basic needs, which is why these internships have started to spin up. The internships are super important to make sure that I can bring people along so that they have the opportunity to feed themselves, although meager if that at that, but opportunities to make money. So it's not waiting for 10 weeks or a year or 2 years before they actually see a paycheck come through. And what's really great about this Whole Foods partnership is that it's basically a pipeline to an interview, right? So assuming you make it through the program, everyone likes what's happening, it becomes, the internship is really expected to turn it into an opportunity for someone. We're trying to figure out how to scale that so it's not 1 or 2 people, but 10 to 15. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of resources on the whole food side. So we're really trying to sort of figure that out, and we'll plan on how that might potentially happen, assuming we can have a lot of success in this first go in this pilot. So the other part of the question was just around what are we seeing as people are engaging with the digital tools. So what's really great that I've noticed is the advocacy that's happening within the younger population. So I'm thinking Gen Z in particular, their ability to be digitally connected and to create advocacy for one another, to learn how to get and coalesce ideas and work those through as a group, I think is really interesting. It's I think it comes with I guess an asterisk or a caution. I don't know. Caution seems a bit extreme, but the thing that I would like to see that I'm not necessarily seeing, I don't know if that's fair. Sorry, I'm just thinking about my thoughts before I say it. Um, I want them to be the creators of the tools that they're using to create content. So I'm seeing them creating the content. Awesome. What that does is it sort of feeds a lot more into this capitalistic society. I'm sorry, I'm going off on I don't mean to be that person, but right, capitalism is really what's driving social media, right? It's about how many people are getting views, how many commercials you're clicking on, how many people are involved, how much more money is coming into who's that guy? Elon Musk's pocket, right? How many more people are on Twitter doing the things that he wants them to do on Twitter? We have people creating content, people of color that are creating content, that are building those platforms for him and for their stakeholders and their people, their folks. What I'd rather see is people of color building those tools themselves, being the ones that are creating the social media, being the ones that are creating the technology that sits underneath NFTs, right? We're going to move into another world, this Web3 based off of Web2, where the people that make the tools don't look like me often. I would love to see that flipped when we get to the end of Web3 and into Web4, which could potentially come sooner than we think, right? If we can change that pipeline and get the creators to look and behave in a different way, then I think we can we might see a change. But right now, we're more the consumer than the creator.
Thank you. We've got about 1 minute, so I'll give you a quick question, a quick answer.
Sure.
I think the Underground Railroad game is amazing. Is it a digital game? That would be more amazing.
So I haven't seen it in digital. Again, I should caution. So the games that I play are really noodly. Like you might be sitting. What's beautiful about that game is it's collaborative. It's really about how can we work together to move more slaves to the north and lose fewer slaves to the south. And by the south, I mean to the slave plantations. If we were to sit down and play that game, we might be playing for like 2.5 hours. Just so you
Right.
know,
Well,
awesome game, but it's a Euro style game that requires a lot of thought. But the beauty of it is that we work together collaboratively to make those decisions. And it teaches you along the way all of the different eras during the slave trade. So there's tons of historical facts, beautiful pieces, and so forth. If you're
so,
ever around Columbia, I would love to play.
so perhaps that's a challenge for the participants here today and your
Right.
partners and students. Again, thanks to Dennis and to Alelia Bundles, who I know is in the audience for this amazing program and your great work. Thank you all for participating,
Thank you.
and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.